Welcome to the Daily Bible Breakdown. And today you begin the exciting journey of studying the entire Bible. And our goal is to get the big picture from beginning to end so that you can have greater confidence in your understanding of the entire Bible, and ultimately so that you can grow closer to the Lord as a result of your more in-depth study of His Word. Now today our chapters are Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. But whenever we jump into a new book of the Bible, like we'll be doing today, I'm going to take just a couple of moments to give you some of the basic background information of that book, because that's going to be really important to our understanding of each chapter, each passage within that book. So when it comes to the book of Genesis, we want to make sure we understand who is writing. And the author of the book of Genesis is Moses. Moses is, in fact, the author not only of Genesis, but of the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And that is known as the Pentateuch, also just referred to as the Law of Moses. Now, there are some people who would like to dispute the fact that Moses wrote those first 5 books of the Bible, since, of course, he was not an eyewitness of any of the events in the book of Genesis. But there is plenty of evidence for us within the Word of God and external evidence of other witnesses that provide sufficient proof that Moses was the author of these books of the Bible. For us as believers, the most important evidence comes from the testimony of Jesus Christ Himself. And repeatedly in the gospel accounts, we find Jesus referring to portions of these first 5 books and attributing them to Moses. So we believe Moses was indeed the author of these 5 books, and Moses is indeed the author of Genesis. And Moses is a character of great interest and great importance in the Word of God. And we'll learn more about him biographically when we get to the remaining books of the Pentateuch, which he was actually involved in the majority of those events. But the life and writings of Moses make up about 15% of the entire Bible, and he's going to be referenced again and again and again, not just in these 5 books, not just in the Old Testament, but throughout all of the Scriptures. Now, why did God use Moses to write this book? What was the purpose of the book of Genesis? Really simply, it's just to record the beginning of human history, and also to record the beginning of the history of the nation of Israel, God's chosen people through whom the Messiah would ultimately come. So those are 2 of the big overarching purposes for which the book was written. Obviously, it's going to cover a ton of other details, but just big picture, Genesis was written to record the beginning of human history and the beginning of the history of the nation of Israel. Now, if we were to choose a theme for the entire book of Genesis, it would be just the simple word beginnings. Everything really has its beginning here in the book of Genesis. And we're going to see that, the beginning of human history. We're going to see the beginning of the universe. We're going to see the beginning of mankind. We're going to see the beginning of thing after thing after thing. It all starts here in the book of Genesis. So that's why we say the theme of the book is beginnings. Now, when it comes to chapters 1 and 2, what we're reading in these chapters is the historical account of the creation of the universe. And so we're going to find those 6 days of creation laid out for us, leading up to what is the pinnacle of God's creative work, and that is His creation of man, where He forms man from the dust of the ground and breathes into his nostrils the breath of life so that man becomes a living soul. Now, it's important for us when we read these opening chapters of Genesis to understand that this is a historical record. This is a historical account of the origin of the universe and the origin of mankind. This is not just Hebrew poetry. This is not just myth or legend. This is the historical account telling us how God, out of nothing, created the entire universe in 6 literal 24-hour days. Now, it's important for us to recognize that the account of creation, the account of origins, is historically accurate and is intended to be a historical record, because that will impact the way we would interpret the rest of the Bible. If we were to try to say that this was just some form of poetry or some form of myth or legend to teach some kind of moral, then we would be jeopardizing how we would understand the rest of the Bible. So it's important for that reason, but it's also important because what we believe about the origin of the universe and the origin of mankind will also inform our entire worldview. Do we believe that we are created by God uniquely for a purpose, or do we believe that we are just the result of natural processes or even accidental processes that occurred over millions and millions of years? What we believe about this is incredibly important, so pay attention as you read it and note that you're reading a historical record of the origin of the universe and of the origin of mankind. Here's some quick things we can gain from our reading of just these first 2 chapters. We learn some things about God, of course. The first thing we see is that God's existence is simply acknowledged and affirmed here from the beginning. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." There is no attempt to prove God's existence. It is just affirmed that He does exist, and He was already existing prior to creation. We talked about Genesis having the theme of beginnings because everything starts in Genesis. God is the exception to that. God always has been and always will be. He has no beginning. He has no ending. He is the creator of all things. And we find that from the very beginning, His existence is assumed. His existence is affirmed. And we also get introduced very briefly here to the concept of the Trinity, because He speaks of Himself in the plural. He says, "Let us make man in our image." So we already get the idea that there is a Trinity here, that it is one God and 3 persons. So there's something interesting and important that we learn about God. We also learn something very important about ourselves, and that is that as human beings, we are created in the image of God. It's repeated a number of times throughout these opening chapters, but we find it stated very clearly in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. So we have affirmed for us that we as human beings are created uniquely in the image of God that is different from all the rest of creation, that separates us from the animals. We have been created in such a way that we are able to relate to, on a spiritual level, the God who created us. And there are really important implications of this idea. It's difficult to find a solid, simple definition of what it means to be created in God's image. Lots of people have debated about this, but we do know it means that we're uniquely created by God and that we are able to relate to God and that He intends to have a relationship with us. So a couple of very important things we learn right off the bat from Genesis chapters 1 and 2. Of course, the first man and woman have been created at this point, Adam and Eve, and placed in that garden. And we will pick up with their story tomorrow when we look at Genesis chapters 3 through 5.